Okay? 95%. And that only 86% ever heard about President Lyndon Johnson. So people knew more about UFOs than their American president. Okay? So, with that in mind, look how it's playing on our culture. Okay? So, what better way to pick up on that culture than to start putting out things that kids can play with? And so the toy market came into play. Okay? Space stations, lost in space robots. There's the G.I. Joe astronaut. Everybody would love a G.I. Joe astronaut with a space capsule yet. How cool is that? Okay. So besides the toys, okay, we have to go back to TV again, entertainment. And how is space coming into our television, coming into our homes besides the news? Well, there's Lost in Space. My Favorite Martian. Jetsons. Dun, dun, dun. No, that's Flintstone. Sorry. Don't know the Jetson theme. Forget it. Okay. Outer Limits. And then finally, Star Trek. So all of these were bringing space. And we were being entertained by space. You know, 1966 was a very big year for UFOs. And in fact, CBS is actually going to create a documentary. This documentary, CBS News, UFO, Friend, Foe, or Fantasy, you can actually watch the entire documentary on YouTube. And it's a fascinating documentary. But again, remember to put yourself back at that time period. Okay? We can't watch it with what we know in 2017, but we have to go and see what it was like back in 1966. CBS, of course, it's going to be hosted by Walter Cronkite. Who else would host it? But here's where a tie-in comes in with our topic tonight. Because as you watch this documentary, it is going to mention the Dexter sightings. You will see Frank Manor being interviewed. You will hear of the Hillsdale incident. And you will also meet Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Okay? Books, magazines, another way to bring space into our lives. And 3 books became bestsellers at this part in 1966 regarding the UFOs. Flying Saucers, Serious Business by Frank Edwards. Incident at Exeter by John G. Fuller. And then Anatomy of a Phenomenon by Jacques Vallée. Okay. Now these are quite old, but if you're interested in them, we can try to see if we have them at the library, see if our library cooperative has it, or we could possibly even get it through a Melcat request if you're interested in that particular book. But the magazines, and we're talking major magazines here. It wasn't UFO Review, and these aren't Flying Saucer Magazine. Take a look at some of the titles, okay? There's Saturday Evening Post. As they mention, are flying saucers real? Okay? That came out in December 17th, 1966. Life Magazine, April 1st, 1966. The week of the flying saucers. Look Magazine, right up there. Okay. October 18th, 1966. Argosy Magazine, December 1966. And finally, Popular Science, January 1966. Each and every one of these mentioning something about UFOs. Are they real? And we're not just talking in the U.S. The phenomena is going on worldwide. Okay. In the U.S., in Russia, in Argentina, Canada, England, Chile, excuse me, Norway, Mexico. People are seeing things in the sky, and we're trying to figure out, trying to grasp just what they are. Okay. So, as we proceed, let me just point out that this program tonight isn't necessarily designed to prove the existence of UFOs. That's not the purpose of this. It's simply to present you insight to an interesting chapter of Southeast Central Michigan folklore history. Okay? And so with that prelude, we are going to begin 1966, UFOs in Michigan, in the small town of Dexter, Michigan. Okay? Washtenaw County. The day, March 20th, 1966. Evening time, 8:30. And this is going to be taking place between 8:30, 11:30, maybe even all the way up to midnight. Okay. A gentleman by the name of Robert Wagner is actually going to call the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department. He's the one that starts the ball rolling here. And he basically is going to talk to the person at the Sheriff's Department, and he's going to state that there is a very strange flying object appearing to land in a swampy area. Okay. At the intersection of, let's see here, Quigley and Brand. So Quigley and Brand. So right there. Okay. Now, something that you have to take in mind as we use these particular maps. And this is something that I found a little bit difficult in using these. I'm dealing with an incident that occurred in 1966, 50-some years ago. I keep repeating this and repeating this, I know, but it's something that we need to keep in mind. A Google map of 2017 does not show what was going on land-wise in 1966. So we need to really keep this in mind as we go through, okay? So again, Robert Wagner calls the Sheriff's Department at around 8:30 and says, something's going on in this particular area. Okay. Gentlemen here, that is Frank Manor. And his son, Ronald. And they actually live like right in this area here. Well, Frank Manor is at home at the time, and he notices this strange object in the swamp area here. And he's going to make a statement that it was on the ground, and it went up about 500 feet, and it came down, and it made all this noise. And according to him, it appeared to be having some difficulty getting up off the ground. Okay. He observed some lights. The lights would change from blue and green to this brilliant red and yellow. Okay. So, along with his son, he decides they're both going to go and investigate. Now, this guy was a hunter. He was a farmer. They knew the land. But Frank also knew that, well, you know something, just in case I'm going to take my kid with me. And so they went out and entered the woods. So as they went out into the woods, Frank's wife is now going to come and describe or contact the Washtenaw Sheriff's Department. Okay? Oops, no, don't tell me it. No, okay. So, what we have, the description of the object. This is what they saw. The object was brownish in color, oval-like. It had a quilted pattern on the outside surface. Appeared to be flat on the bottom, cone-shaped on top. It was low in height. Two small lights appeared to be on the outer edge of the object. These would glow from blue and green that would intensify to red. When the object illuminated, it turned into a yellow-whitish color. Okay? And that the body appeared to be rough in texture. He also mentioned that we then heard a sound like a whistle, like a bullet ricocheting. The object went up in the air, right over us, and disappeared. Okay? Well, remember, we just called the Sheriff's Department. And the Sheriff's deputies, Stanley McFadden and Dan Fitzpatrick, are actually going to come and participate in this investigation. So what they are going to end up doing is, as they're proceeding this way, at around this area, when they were on North Territorial Road in Mass, somewhere in here, that's the intersection that they mentioned, they stated that they saw something of a brilliant white or red light. Okay? So, we have them moving down North Territorial. As they're moving down, they will state, suddenly a strange lighted object appeared overhead. They turned on their spotlight and aimed it at the object. This is a quote. From what we could see, the object was as large as a small house. It was kind of pushed down flat. It had red-green lights on it, and its movements, which could not possibly be made by any aircraft I've ever heard of. And they watched it disappear. Okay. So, they finally come down to Quigley and Brand intersection, and they will, in fact, get out and begin approaching the swamp in this direction. Now, remember, we have McFadden and his son are approaching this way. The law enforcement is coming that way. Okay? So, from two particular distinct ways, hopefully to get a better sight of what this object is all about. Now, as Fitzpatrick is going through, he is going to state that as they're going through the swamp, that the glow brightened and dimmed slowly, as those stage lights, like these stage lights, were brightened and dimmed, but he never sees the object. He only saw the lights dimming and getting brighter. Okay? McFadden decides they are actually going to split up. So Fitzpatrick is going to come here, McFadden goes another way, just to try to get observation points on this thing. Both deputies have flashlights, and they're seen by Frank Manor and his son. So Manor knows that the deputies are out there. He sees the flashlights flashing. Okay? Fitzpatrick is going to approach what he believes the source of the glow with his flashlight. But as he's coming up, there's a slight rise in the swamp, just a little hillock. Okay? As he's coming up, the glow disappears, but then yet reappears in another part of the swamp. the motion of the light was always smooth and would follow horizontal and follow the contour of the land. So it wasn't jerky up and down and things like this. It was just be a fluid flowing light. After walking around in the swamp, they decided to come back and head back to their patrol cars. Well, when they returned, there were two other deputies there waiting for them. One deputy, Robert Hunnewell, and then Deputy Buford Bushrow. And they come out of the swamps, and these other two deputies come and immediately ask them, "Hey, didn't you guys notice the lights? They were flying right above your head." Well, McFadden and Fitzpatrick, they don't know what they're talking about. It's like, fill us in on this because we have no idea what you're talking about. So they basically, the other two deputies now, the ones that were remaining in their cars, they actually witnessed 4 lights hovering directly over the officers while they were in the swamp. How could they have missed something like that? Okay. Hunnewell is actually going to state that one of the lights came directly toward the patrol car, and motor was off. So as this object went over the patrol car, there was no sound whatsoever. Okay? He actually is going to mention before that the objects are going to fly in a formation where you had 2 above the other 2. Okay? One set high, one set lower. He's going to state later on in a newspaper article, if there is actually some type of flying object now making periodic visits, this theory of one coming down for a brief moment and the others hovering around over the area for protection seems pretty logical to me. Right now, we're not discounting anything. And in fact, that was actually put out by the sheriff of Washtenaw County, Doug Harvey. Now, here's where it takes an unfortunate turn. If you happen to go and watch the CBS documentary, as I mentioned before, Frank Manor will be there. Frank Manor, his kids, his family, his property. He is going to report to the sheriff, and he makes this statement to CBS that vandals are breaking the windshields of his car, they're tossing bottles onto the porch, they're ridiculing and chiding the entire family, the kids in school, his wife while she's shopping, the whole bit. Being awakened by late night phone calls. People just haphazardly show up and start walking across their property. And in fact, he is going to state emphatically in the documentary for CBS that had he known that this would have occurred and he and his family would have been subjected to this, he would have just kept his mouth shut. And the Dexter incident probably wouldn't have gone any further. Okay? On the following day, Sheriff Harvey is going to come back to the property, and again, we're talking in this area. Washtenaw County Civil Defense Director Gerald Miller, about a half a dozen deputies, are going to revisit that particular area. Frank Manor is going to be there as well, and he's going to show them how he went into the forest and how he went into the swamp to try to find this thing. One of the officers is going to bring a Geiger counter. Good idea. But as he was sweeping the area, there was no trace of radioactivity ever found. Sheriff Harvey is going to state there is absolutely no physical evidence of an object landing. There was no scorched earth, burned grass, there was no depression in the ground, no imprints, no tracks or any impression whatsoever. There was nothing there. Okay? Well, it comes nightfall. And they're going to get a call from another resident near Dexter, a John Monahan. And he calls the sheriff up and says, "Hey, Sheriff, saw some strange lights flying over the sky of North Territorial Road. But now, for the evening, but on that night, on that evening of March 21st, the spotlight is not going to be on Dexter, but it's going to move to Hillsdale, Michigan." Okay. Hillsdale, Michigan, March 21st, 1966. The incidents that we will be looking at is going to occur somewhere between the area 10-ish all the way into the early morning hours. Okay. Now we're going to zero in on Hillsdale College. Okay. Hillsdale College. We're going to start with one of the co-eds, and her name was Barbara Cohn, commonly referred to as Gidget. You know, you don't have those, nicknames now, So she was living on the second floor, living in the east wing of the new woman's dorm. And as she's looking out the window, she notices this object radiating this silver intense light. And it was heading toward the dorm. According to Barbara, it looked like a squash football or basketball. Surroundings seemed to glow. It would flash red, then white. Okay. It began to head south-southwest and then dropped below the tree line near the field house. So we're going to be looking at an area, if you know Hillsdale, but again, you have to remember, this particular campus description is current. It is not the same as it was back in the 1960s. Okay. Other co-eds, Barbara's calling them, look out the window, and all the co-eds are watching, there's co-eds watching this. So it's not just her, okay? So some are wondering, wow, maybe, there's a storm in the area, maybe there's a helicopter in trouble, maybe an airplane's in trouble. So one of them are actually going to get on the phone and call the airport. Well, nobody's manning this small little airport. So their next call is to the Civil Defense Authority of Hillsdale. And they're going to try to get a hold of Mr. William Van Horn, who was head of the Civil Defense for Hillsdale. Okay? They get his wife. And Mrs. Van Horn is going to say, no, Harvey hasn't gotten word one. We haven't heard anything about a helicopter. We haven't heard anything about an airplane. Okay. Hang up the phone. Well, now they start looking for their dorm mom. And she is a woman by the name of Kelly Hearn. But she's nowhere to be found in the dorm because she's also she's somewhere counseling another student at the time. Okay. So they call Mrs. Van Horn back. Okay. So Mrs. Van Horn is going to say, don't worry about it, girls. I will inform my husband. Okay? But before she lets the girls go, she now mentions to them, well, they've spotted UFOs around Ann Arbor tonight, But don't worry. Call me if it comes back. And with that, she hangs up. Okay? So, Mrs. Van Horn contacts her husband. Husband's on his way to Hillsdale College. Kelly Hearn comes back. Now, going to give you a little bit of background about Kelly Hearn. She's the Assistant Dean of Women. Okay? She's an assistant professor of English. She was a newspaper reporter for 7 years prior to her taking this position at Hillsdale College. Okay? Now, so she knows a little bit about reporting. She knows a little bit about the world out there. Okay? So it's not just some grad student. Okay? We're talking about a professional, careered woman. Okay? So upon her return, she basically told the co-eds, I want you to start taking notes of everything you see. And they watched that object and took notes for approximately 4 hours. Now, we have to give her credit in this instance, because what she is trying to do is document what is going on at that time. Okay. There's no, cameras available or anything that we can just, pop up on the computer and things like this. What do these girls have at their disposal to record? That would be notes. So, the only problem with that is that they would later come back and these scientific experts would say, well, what she did was okay, but it really didn't help us out, because there's no photographic or recording equipment, and really, the notes that they took don't shed light on what they observed. Now remember, these are the professors, these are the experts who are saying these girls' notes will shed little light on what they observed. Okay? We'll have to come back to that. Another co-ed, her name was Pinky Poffenberger. You got to like that. Pinky Poffenberger. Okay? Well, at around 10:30-ish, she notices blinking lights near the Arboretum. Okay? That is going to be, like in this particular area here. Okay? She moves closer to the window, and so the object actually, once again, approaches the dormitory. Okay? But this, she will state, it stops in midair and begins to revolve. Well, that totally freaks her out. Okay? She screams, and girls again come hauling into the rooms, looking out the window, all to observe this particular light. Okay. Okay. So, there's the Arboretum here. And so the girls' dorm would have been here. Okay? Now, there was another co-ed, and she was a studious co-ed, Sarah Robichek. At first, she had to get this paper typed. She had to get this paper typed, and she couldn't be bothered with this, so she's banging away at the typewriter, okay? Well, her roommate, though, who was Joe Wilson, was watching these lights. Well, she finally convinced Sarah, hey, come on, check these things out, check these things out. Well, Sarah finally, okay, I'll go and take a look at that. Well, as they make their way to the window and she's looking over here, she notices this object. And it had this yellowish white glow to it. It was almost like what she considered floodlights on a house. Okay? She didn't really know what it was. She noticed it and basically turned back and went to typing. Well, you know, curiosity, okay? Now it was in her head. So she had to stop typing again. She went back to the window. And now they thought this light to be pulsating. Okay? Well, Joe Wilson is going to leave the room and going to try to find a dorm proctor, an RA. Okay? She returns with Barbara Cole. They all went to the window. The glow was gone, but there were 3 lights, all of like a yellowish white color. Okay? They will state that the middle will turn to red. That one will go out, and then it turned red on the left. Okay? At approximately 11 o'clock, witnesses state that this will move up, move left and right, and then begin proceeding toward the dorm. Sarah calls civil defense once again. Okay? Mrs. Van Horn is trying to calm this resident down, this collegiate girl down. Okay? So she decides, you know something? I'll call the state police for you. Okay? Just hang tight. Mr. Van Horn will be there in a little while. Okay? So the girls would actually watch these lights. They would brighten and fade, brighten and fade. All 3 would show up. The one on the left would disappear, and the right one would turn red. Okay? And then they began watching this object move up and down, side to side. And they knew that it was moving because they were watching it in relation to a phone pole. Okay? So you had a stationary object, and the object was moving back, forth, left and right, and the lights always maintained an even space apart. Okay? The girls finally noticed some police cars coming on the scene. Okay? Now, according to them, they were coming down this particular road. Now, today, this is again called Barber Drive. I believe that back in the mid-1960s that particular road was called Arboretum Road. Well, for the simple reason that that's the Arboretum. That's logical. Okay? But as the patrol cars would go down this particular road, okay, they believed that the object had now come from here and was near the baseball field here. But every time that the police would come here, the object would diminish in intensity. Okay? Squad car drove right by, never even saw the object. But as it went past, according to the girls, that this object started to act really frantically. Okay, its motions, it went up and down, back and forth. Okay? The law enforcement came back down the road and the lights remained stationary. So, they all observed the object would dim its lights when the police cars would approach and brighten again as the police cars left the area. Okay? Mr. Van Horn finally did arrive at the dormitory. He would head upstairs, went to the particular room, room 204, and even he was there to witness this back and forth of the police cars, the diminishing lights and things of this nature. So, Mr. Van Horn is now going to announce that it was definitely a UFO. He is the first person to state unequivocally that what we saw was in fact a UFO. It was proven by facts of its maneuverability, motion, and the fact that even when it was stationary, it wasn't on the ground. Okay? He estimates the object to be about 20 feet. And the girls will continue to observe this as it goes back and forth playing near the Arboretum. The observation is going to go on until about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then that was basically it. Now, one would consider, when you look at Dexter, we had a father and son and another person on the opposite side of the swamp be the witness. But here at Hillsdale College, and depending upon what book, what article you read, the numbers may vary. But the numbers are going to be anywhere between 62 and 87. 62 and 87 eyewitnesses who saw these particular lights at some time near the girls' dormitory at Hillsdale College. Okay? Well, there was a gigantic fervor here, Something was happening. Now the government is going to be getting involved. Michigan Congressman Weston Vivian, okay, he is going to make an official request of the Defense Department. And he is going to ask them to investigate the reports of unidentified flying objects near Ann Arbor, Michigan. As you can see right there, Ann Arbor News, U.S. asked to probe saucers. Okay. So, now it was time to investigate. The Defense Department here, gentleman here, Major Hector Quintanilla Jr. Hector Quintanilla Jr. He was actually the Air Force head of Project Blue Book. And for any of you who've dabbled with the UFOs and stuff like that, Project Blue Book is something that you should be relatively familiar with. Okay? It was established in 1947. And it was established to evaluate and analyze reports of UFOs. That was the purpose of it. Now, Major Quintanilla was getting, let's say a bit of pressure. And he needed this resolved quickly because, according to him, he was seeking a quick resolution to this because, quote, the brass, meaning the Pentagon, is having a fit. Okay? So, the United States Air Force is going to dispatch this gentleman that you see right here, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Now, Dr. Hynek is an astrophysicist. He was a professor at Northwestern University. Okay? So on March 22nd, 1966, he is going to head on out and start heading to Michigan. So, what we have here is Dr. Hynek has been doing this for the United States Air Force and checking out these phenomena for 18 years. So prior to that, he had well over 100 investigative, not reports, but investigations that he'd already done for the United States Air Force. His journey will take him out to Selfridge Air Force Base. Okay, that's going to be his headquarters during these investigations. Now, there was a little bit of tension going on between Dr. Hynek and the major here. Right from the get-go, you can see and sense that they're not really on the same page here. Okay? The major here, I wanted hurry up investigation, rush the job, get an answer, get it out there quick, boom. Signed, sealed, delivered, boom, get it out there. Okay? But Dr. Hynek wasn't like that. He was a scientist. And scientists wanted to delve into and investigate this rash of sightings. And in all honesty, the rash of sightings that we mentioned here, it actually started probably about a week before that, around March 17th, because UFO sightings were occurring in Monroe County, in Washtenaw County, Wayne County, Lucas County, Ohio. And the thing that was going on is, yes, people were witnessing these UFOs. But they were also being witnessed by law enforcement officers. Okay? Law enforcement officers were seeing these things as well. Now, getting back to Quintanilla and Dr. Hynek. Dr. Hynek was not really up to par. In fact, he actually had recently fallen and broken his jaw. And, well, walking around with a broken jaw, probably not the greatest thing, so of course he was in pain. He was the only one that the Air Force sent to investigate this report. One man. Okay? So, there's no way that one man can investigate all of the events that were going on in southeast Michigan. So what he has to do is make a decision. And his decision was, we're going to go to Dexter, we're going to go to Hillsdale, and we have to simply dismiss all the others from the previous week. Okay. So Dr. Hynek is now going to find himself Wednesday, March 23rd in Dexter, Michigan. And you can see right here, here's Dr. Hynek, and there's Frank Manor. So Dr. Hynek will begin his investigation on the Manor Farm. Now the Manor Farm was probably in this area here. And again, you have a Google image, 2017. So guesstimating that this is the location that they will be investigating. Now, Dr. Hynek arrives at the Manor Farm. But you know something? It's a zoo. It's a media frenzy. Okay? Local news reporters, newspaper reporters, magazines, everybody is out there. Remember, this just happened. Okay? Okay? So everybody is just going wild out there. And so when Dr. Hynek arrives on the scene, he actually has to fight his way through the crowd to begin interviewing his witnesses. Now, local law enforcement, they're there to assist, but if you recall, all of the deputies, Hunnewell, Bushrow, McFadden, they were witnesses as well. And so the newspaper guys and the TV guys and all these, they're on camera. They're getting quoted in the newspaper. Okay? They're not doing crowd control. They're part of this investigation. So Dr. Hynek is, again, he's there all by himself. So he realizes, you know something, this is just crazy. I'm going to try to do what I can and see what comes out of this. Okay. So he finally corrals Frank Manor and his son, and finally is able to set them aside and sit down and, okay, Mr. Manor, tell me about this. So Frank Manor goes through it again. And you can imagine, probably Frank Manor and his son, they're so tired of this. I can't take it anymore. How many times do I have to tell this story? You know? So, in encapsulation maybe, Frank Manor and his son watched the glow behind the trees in the swamp. When the deputies arrived, they were already making their way into the swamp. The deputies would enter from a different way. Okay. Manor will take Hynek on the path that they took into the swamp. Okay. As time goes by, continual conversations, Deputy McFadden is actually going to draw an object that he says, well, this is, drew a figure of the object. Problem is, he stated that he didn't see it. So, right there you can see, there's going to be a problem here. Where are we getting this information from? And this is coming from a deputy. Okay. Dr. Hynek is told about the 4 lights above the officers, that they did not see these 4 lights above them when they came out of the swamp, and that as the lights passed the patrol car, there was no sound whatsoever, and the lights were gone. So that's how he spent Wednesday, March 23rd. Okay. On Thursday, March 24th, we find Dr. Hynek heading to Hillsdale. However, something is going to happen that he doesn't know about. Okay? Prior to arriving in Hillsdale, Major Quintanilla announces at a press conference that, well, you know something, the investigation's really beginning to take shape. And we hope to have a reasonable explanation sometime tomorrow. Whoa, time out. Okay, the major is saying, we're going to have this major conference Friday the 25th. Hynek hasn't even gotten to Hillsdale yet. And what is going on? In fact, later, Dr. Hynek will find out about this, and he will later be quoted to say, it did me no good to protest. To say that as yet I had no real idea what had caused the reported sightings in the swamp. I was to have a press conference, ready or not. So you could see the major sort of blindsided Dr. Hynek here. So Dr. Hynek, so again, investigation is beginning to shape up. We hope to have a reasonable explanation sometime tomorrow. And then Dr. Hynek stating, it did me no good to protest. Okay. So Dr. Hynek's first interview is going to be with Mr. Van Horn, okay, the head of the Civil Defense Department. Okay. So he is going to talk to Mr. Van Horn for quite some time to get his insight and things of this nature. Okay. After talking with him for an extended period of time, he and Hynek are actually going to proceed to the dormitory and begin to talk to the girls. Now remember, how many co-eds were witness to this? 82, 87, 60. Well, the first thing he is going to do is meaning Dr. Hynek and Van Horn, go to the dormitory, and Mrs. Hearn is going to take them to the room, one of the rooms where the lights were seen. He is going to talk to Mary Jo Wilson and Sarah Robichek. Okay? And they are going to give him their explanation of these particular lights. Okay? We observed a fairly bright light, red light and 2 yellow lights. They were close to the ground. They were close to the marsh, but they never reported seeing a tangible object. And it's at this time Mr. Van Horn says something, just says it out there. And he stated that, well, his first impression, he thought, well, they could be marsh lights or fox lights. Okay? Uh-oh. Keep that in mind. Keep that term in mind, because that's going to come into play in a very short amount of time. Okay? The lights ascending and descending 4 times between 11:30 and 1:45 p.m. or a.m., I'm sorry. 11:30 p.m., 1:45 a.m. Okay? So he's just collecting notes. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. So, Air Force is to explain saucers. So he's collected his information. And as a scientist, he will compile his facts and bring them to a conclusion. So his comments, and this is, I'm just surmising here, okay? Not reporting on many of the peripheral conversations he had with individual policemen. He wasn't going to worry about that. He is actually, Dr. Hine is actually going to stop by Ann Arbor on his way back to Selfridge. And he comes up to a gentleman by the last name of Colonel Miller, and he was the head of the civil defense chief for Ann Arbor. They have a long talk, and in conclusion, Colonel Miller states that, you know something, these lights, didn't take any stock in what was going around down there. Dr. Hynek came away with the general impression that they weren't dealing with, quote, seasoned and careful investigators, but rather with men untutored in matters outside their normal line of reporting. What that basically says in a nutshell is that they were law enforcement, but you know something? For law enforcement to really explain what's going on scientifically, not their cup of tea. So we really have to take what they're saying with a, grain of salt, okay? According to Dr. Hynek, facts were only such things reported consistently by several witnesses. But remember, take into consideration that he only had 2 days, that when he was in Dexter, he interviewed Frank, his son, a few of the police investigators who and he already commented, they didn't really do such a great job. He talked with Van Horn, Colonel Miller, Mrs. Hearn, and a few of the co-eds. Okay? And a lot of times, he would also mention that, and he witnessed this predominantly at the Manor Farm, is that the witnesses were always backbiting, okay? They wanted to shove in. They wanted to get into the limelight and stuff like that, so they were trying to always one-up the eyewitness accounts of somebody else, okay? The commonalities. The lights in both cases were associated with swamp areas, that there were reddish lights, yellow lights, blue-green lights. that they both shared a motion, that the motion was described as smooth and slow, had a tendency to disappear suddenly and reappear somewhere else. So, in conclusion, he came with, since interest and excitement generated in these cases was mounting to fever pitch, it seemed expedient, heck, mandatory, to hold a press conference and make a progress report. Okay? Before doing that, again, he meets with 11 professors, friends of his from U of M. They sit down and talk. They talk about this, what's going on. Okay? The professors all prefer to remain anonymous. He obtained information on this phenomena called marsh gas, willow of the wisp, Ingus fatus, fox lights, and lights generally associated with them. Okay. So you can see where this is going already. He's collecting this information. We now go to the press conference on Friday, May 25th, at the Detroit Press Club. It was the most highly attended press conference at the Detroit Press Club since that time. It was packed to the max. And what he said, this was his conclusion. It appears to me that many of the conditions for the appearance of swamp lights were satisfied at both Dexter and Hillsdale. I can't state with any certainty that this is the correct solution to the problem, merely that it is the most likely cause. I would, of course, appreciate learning of other possible natural causes should they be forthcoming. We can, I believe, completely eliminate any solution based on aircraft, balloons, birds, meteors, stars, etc., because they simply do not fit the consistent data reported to me. End of quote. Now, it's very important for you to take a look at that statement. Yes, he did make the statement of the swamp gas. However, what's constantly looked over was what I have put in bold letters. That's stating, I cannot state with any certainty that this is the correct solution to the problem. For some reason, nobody heard that. It was whitewashed. All that they heard was swamp gas. So the reason for his hypotheses were, most witnesses described lights of red, yellow, blue, green. Only 2 witnesses, Manor and his son, described an object, and that being 500 yards away. The location of each instance was over a swamp. The sightings in a marsh area is significant because location of glow is pinpointed. It's in the swamp. Okay? Lights resemble tiny flames, sometimes seen right on the ground or floating above it. There was no heat felt, and the sights do not burn, char, or singe the ground. There was nothing like that. We stated that before when he was in Dexter, when they went to investigate it with the Geiger counter. There was nothing on the ground. Generally, no smell, no sound. Okay, that's true. That's been verified. The disappearance of the glow whenever lights approach indicates the glow seemed bright only to darkness-adapted eyes. Okay? And then finally, he also dismisses a photo taken by a Washtenaw County deputy of 2 unidentified objects that the deputy saw on March 17th near Milan. This is a famous photograph. You can find it on the internet. And according to Dr. Hynek, in fact, there it is right there. That was the photograph taken by the Washtenaw County deputy. According to Dr. Hynek, this was a time exposure of Venus and the moon. Okay? Now, my only thought about that is, does this deputy really know how to do a time exposure, and what kind of camera would he have at the time? Okay? Now, reactions, more like repercussions. Okay? William Van Horn, and these are all quotes, can be found in books, newspaper articles. William Van Horn, when I was a kid, I played regularly in the swamp. I know what Mark's gash looks like, its color and what it does. What we saw the other night was not this. It was an object which I've never seen before. Okay? That's the Civil Defense Authority. Next, we have Milton Ferguson. Milton Ferguson is the Hillsdale College Director of Public Affairs. And he goes to state what they saw, they meaning the co-eds and Van Horn and the dorm mother and all these folks, what they saw had no resemblance to rockets or flares. I don't know what it was, nor do the people who saw it, but this is trying to explain it arbitrarily. The Air Force is going to get into trouble going on this way. It seems a whitewash. Wow, strong words. Barbara Cohn. We saw her right at the beginning. She was one of the eyewitnesses in Hillsdale. These objects were not viewed over a swamp, but over the college arboretum and a baseball field. The arboretum is a carefully tended woodsy park with a few small ponds and no rotting vegetation. So, where was the gas produced? He did not do his research thoroughly before rendering an opinion. Well, that I think you got to give to her. But it also wasn't his fault that he was subjected to a deadline that he knew nothing about. And finally, here's one that I happened across. Jean Dixon, you probably know her from, not Michiganian, but I think they are planes or military aircraft of some kind. But not from outer space. I think they are from the other side. They are either from the enemy or our own Air Force. So Jean Dixon is basically saying, well, this is probably either a Russian aircraft or an American aircraft doing this. Okay. Well, of course, what's going to happen here, very large repercussions are going to occur. In fact, this is going to prompt, you should recognize him, Gerald Ford. Well, back in 1966, he was our congressman. So, because of what happened and because of what he considered, just a flippant report, Representative Gerald Ford is going to call for a thorough congressional investigation into the rash of reportings in southern Michigan. Okay? He is basically going to highly criticize the Air Force for giving a flippant answer. Flippant, F-L-I-P-P-A-N-T, just to make sure. Flippant. And passed it off as swamp gas. It seems to me that this mystery has been around the country with all the various sightings does require that Congress take a good look at it, bring out these witnesses from the Air Force and NASA, have them interrogated by members of the House or Senate committee, Let them put their records on the line. Let the people who have allegedly seen these objects come and testify. Well, it was actually going to take place. What he basically did set the ball rolling, that there was going to be an investigation. Okay? So, the United States House Armed Services Committee will be investigating the UFO phenomena. They agree to that. But they agree to a one-day investigation. Okay? One day only, April 5th, 1966. And there are going to be a total of 3 witnesses. The first witness, gentleman right here, Secretary of the Air Force, Harold Brown. And Harold Brown is just going to toe the line, toe the government line. He acknowledges that there are approximately 48 unexplained reports in the Blue Book files, that there is no evidence to prove UFOs threaten national security or extraterrestrial phenomena, and the Air Force has the situation in hand. Okay. Next, who do you think? Well, it's got to be the Major. Major Quintanilla. And in all honesty, summing up his testimony, he provides nothing, no tangible evidence. He's very deceptive at times in his answers. Okay? So, doesn't really do anything for it. And finally, Dr. Hynek. Okay? Dr. Hynek is probably going to take the stand and say probably the best summary that he could have possibly imagined. And this is a quote. "The press has described me as a puppet of the Air Force and has stated that I say only what the Air Force tells me to say. The kind of activity in Michigan is not unusual. It happened only that Dexter and Hillsdale incidents have little scientific significance but have attracted large national attention. Similar incidents, and some more intriguing, have been occurring for many years. I felt I would be derelict in my scientific responsibility to the Air Force if I did not point out that the whole UFO phenomena might have aspects to make it worthy of scientific attention. The body of data accumulated since 1948 deserves close scrutiny by a civilian panel of physical and social scientists, and that this panel should be asked to examine the UFO problem critically for the express purpose of determining whether a major problem really exists." So he's laying it on the line. He told the committee, you know something? Forget what the Air Force says. Let's set up a panel and let's do this scientifically. Well, the committee is going to agree with Dr. Hynek. You know, that's a great idea. We are going to look for an independent panel to study this. And so the government and the Air Force decides what better way to find this investigation panel than to start hitting the colleges and universities. But for some reason, colleges and universities are turning them down. They want no part of this whatsoever. I wonder why that is. Well, finally, in October of 1966, the University of Colorado agrees they will be willing to conduct the study. Well, a gentleman by the name of Edward Condon, he's a physicist at the University of Colorado. And the Condon Committee will launch their investigation into the study of these particular UFOs. The problem was that Professor Condon was very skeptical of the UFOs. And so it didn't surprise anyone that when his committee came to their final conclusion that the UFO project is simply, it's a foregone conclusion. It was going to be in the negative. Okay? Don't expect anything. It was just, nope, that's it. Don't worry about the UFOs. '66, 1954. Dr. James McDonald, professor, atmospheric physics, University of Arizona. He is actually driving in the desert with his friends, and they happen to observe a UFO. He will contact Project Blue Book, but ever since that time, since '54, it hasn't been sitting well with him. Well, his friend Dr. Hynek, he was going to go see Dr. Hynek. But on his way, he makes a little detour to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the one in Dayton, Ohio. Why Wright-Patterson? Well, that just happens to be the headquarters of Project Blue Book. So, Dr. Patterson here, he actually gains access to the Project Blue Book files. And as he's going through the files, he comes across this certain report. And the report simply recommends that the United States Air Force should use Project Blue Book to debunk UFO reports in order to dampen the public curiosity about the UFOs. He is irate, to say the least. He is going to see Dr. Hynek and just lay the thing out. And Dr. Hynek, well, what can I do? What can I do? Well, Dr. Hynek is going to do something that goes above and beyond. 2 months later,